The crystalline shuttle cut through Earth's thick atmosphere like a glowing diamond falling from space. Inside, the strangest group of students anyone had ever seen pressed their faces against the windows, watching the blue and green planet grow. Larger beneath them, Professor Velthar stood at the front of the shuttle, her diamond-like skin catching the light from Earth's sun. She was tall, even for a Zephyrian, and when she spoke, her voice sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Her students had never seen anything like this blue world before. "Look at those white swirls in the atmosphere," she said, pointing at the clouds below. "So much water vapor. The humans here have adapted to an incredibly wet environment." She turned to face her students, her crystalline features reflecting the planet's light. "Remember what we learned in our briefings? Humans only achieved space travel recently, maybe 50 years ago at most. They're still very young as a species." Crix, whose body looked like living fog, drifted closer to the window. He was a nebuloid, and his people existed as conscious gas clouds that could think and feel just like solid beings. "Professor, why did the consortium choose such a primitive world for our exchange program?" His voice sounded like whispers carried on wind. "That's exactly why," Velthar replied with what might have been a smile on her crystal face. "We need to understand how younger civilizations develop. Humans are perfect for this study. They've barely left their own star system. They have no real technology by our standards, and from what our scouts reported, they spend most of their time growing food and making simple tools." Thin, who looked like a walking tree with bright green leaves instead of hair, rustled nervously. Her people, the Verdani, were plant-based beings who got their energy from sunlight and soil minerals. "But Professor, what if they don't accept us? What if they're afraid?" "Nonsense," Velthar laughed, the sound like crystal bells. "Humans are barely more advanced than the creatures they share their planet with. They have no weapons that could harm us, no technology that poses any threat. Our research shows they're mainly concerned with farming, simple art, and basic social structures. They're probably more afraid of their own weather than they would be of us." The shuttle began its final descent toward what the humans called Sol. From above, the city looked like a vast garden with small buildings scattered throughout. None of the alien students could see the complexity hidden beneath that peaceful view. "I've arranged for us to stay at their main learning center," Velthar continued. "Sol National University, they call it. Very primitive name, but it shows they value learning, which is promising. We'll observe their simple customs, study their basic social interactions, and document how a species behaves in its early development stages." Crix floated closer to another window, watching the strange rectangular structures grow larger as they descended. "Professor, some of those buildings look quite large for a primitive species." "Size doesn't equal sophistication," Velthar replied dismissively. "Even simple creatures can stack stones on top of each other. What matters is complexity of thought, advanced technology, and peaceful social development. From everything we know, humans excel at none of these things." As they landed in the designated area, the students could see small groups of humans gathering to watch their arrival. The humans looked curious but not frightened, which pleased Velthar. They appeared to be bipedal mammals with relatively small bodies, and what looked like fur only on the tops of their heads. "Look how small they are," Thin observed, her leaves brightening with interest. "And they seem so fragile. No natural armor, no protective shells, no ability to change form like us." A human approached their shuttle, and Velthar activated the translation device. The human appeared to be young, probably barely past maturity for his species, with dark hair and clothes that seemed designed for comfort rather than protection. "Welcome to Earth," the human said with what their translator identified as friendly vocal patterns. "I'm Jiho, your assigned cultural guide. I'm really excited to show you around our campus and introduce you to our way of life." Velthar was pleased by the human's obvious enthusiasm and lack of fear. "You see?" she told her students as they prepared to leave the shuttle. "Exactly as predicted. Friendly, simple, and eager to please. This will be the easiest cultural study we've ever conducted." As they stepped onto Earth's surface, breathing the alien air through their protective filters, None of them noticed the small memorial statue they passed on their way to the university dormitories. If they had bothered to read the inscription, they might have been surprised to learn it honored humans who had died in something called the Korean War. But they didn't read it. They were too busy congratulating themselves on discovering such a peaceful, harmless species to study. Professor Velthar walked confidently into the human lecture hall, expecting to hear about simple farming techniques or maybe basic tool-making. She had prepared her students for what she thought would be a boring discussion about crop rotation or primitive cooking methods. The room was filled with young humans sitting quietly, notebooks ready, looking perfectly normal and harmless. Professor Minho, a middle-aged human with graying hair, stood at the front with a warm smile. He seemed like the kind of gentle teacher you'd expect from such a peaceful species. Velthar settled into her seat, ready to take notes on humanity's simple agricultural progress. Today we'll begin our study of the Great War, Minho announced cheerfully, clicking to his first presentation slide, what humans now call World War I. Velthar blinked, her crystalline features catching the light. War? Surely he meant some kind of competition or disagreement over farming land. This conflict began in 1914 and lasted 4 brutal years. Minho continued in the same casual tone he might use to discuss the weather. By the time it ended, approximately 17 million human beings had died. The number hung in the air like a physical weight. Thin, sitting beside Velthar, made a soft gasping sound as her bright green leaves suddenly shifted to a sickly yellow color. Among her people, that color change meant absolute terror. 17 million, Creeks whispered, his gaseous form flickering, like a candle in the wind. That's more than the entire population of most planets. But Professor Minho wasn't finished. He clicked to the next slide with disturbing casualness. Of course, we called it the war to end all wars, but that turned out to be overly optimistic. Just 20 years later, we had World War II, which was significantly more devastating. Velthar felt something she had never experienced before. Her people had evolved beyond fear millions of years ago, but sitting in that lecture hall, she felt what could only be described as dread creeping through her crystalline body. World War II resulted in approximately 70 to 85 million deaths, Minho explained, showing images of destroyed cities that looked like they'd been hit by asteroids. The exact number is difficult to calculate because of the scale of destruction. Thin's leaves were now turning completely brown, a color that meant her species was preparing for death. Professor, she whispered to Velthar, surely this was some kind of rare catastrophe, like a natural disaster that happened once in their history? Before Velthar could answer, a human student named Hyun raised his hand. Professor Minho, should we also cover the earlier conflicts for context? Excellent point, Hyun, Minho replied enthusiastically. Class, it's important to understand that these world wars were just the most recent large-scale conflicts. Throughout human history, we've had the Mongol conquests, which killed roughly 30 million people. The Crusades lasted for centuries. The Napoleonic Wars reshaped entire continents. The American Civil War, the 30 Years' War, the conquests of Alexander the Great. Crix's form was becoming increasingly unstable. His people, the nebuloids, shared consciousness through atmospheric connections. They had never even conceived of deliberately harming another being. The very idea was like trying to imagine cutting off your own arm for fun. How many wars have humans fought? Asked another alien student who had joined them. Hyun laughed, actually laughed, as if the question was amusing. Hundreds of major ones, thousands if you count smaller conflicts. There are entire universities dedicated just to studying military history. My grandfather fought in the Korean War, my great-grandfather in World War II. Your grandfather was a warrior? Thin asked in horror. Well, soldier, but yeah, most families have military service somewhere in their history. It's pretty normal. Professor Velthar was rapidly recalculating everything she thought she knew about humans. These weren't primitive farmers. These were... what were they? Then, Professor Minho mentioned something that made her crystalline blood freeze. Of course, modern warfare has evolved significantly since World War II. The development of nuclear weapons changed everything. Nuclear weapons? Velthar managed to ask. Oh yes, Minho replied brightly, as if discussing flower arrangements. Weapons capable of destroying entire cities in seconds. The bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki each killed over 100,000 people instantly. Modern nuclear weapons are thousands of times more powerful. The lecture hall fell silent except for the sound of Crix's form destabilizing further. Velthar found herself doing mental calculations. How far was their shuttle? How quickly could they reach it? These creatures weren't just dangerous. They were walking apocalypses who spoke about mass destruction, the way her people discussed art. And the amazing thing, continued a human student named Soyan, is how much our military technology has advanced. Smart missiles, drone warfare, biological weapons, chemical weapons. Biological weapons? Thin whispered, her leaves now completely gray. Diseases designed to kill, Hyun explained helpfully. Though we've mostly agreed not to use those anymore. Too unpredictable. Velthar stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Every instinct in her ancient, evolved mind was screaming at her to run. These weren't primitive beings learning to farm. These were apex predators who had spent their entire existence perfecting the art of killing, and they talked about it like discussing lunch plans. Class dismissed, she announced to her alien students, her voice cracking like breaking crystal. We need to review our notes. As they hurried from the lecture hall, she could hear Professor Minho calling after them cheerfully. Don't forget, next week we'll be covering the Cold War and nuclear deterrence theory. Behind them, the human students continued chatting casually about weapons that could end entire civilizations, as if mass destruction was just another Tuesday topic. After the terrifying history lecture, Professor Velthar hoped the biology class would be less disturbing. Maybe they'd learn about peaceful human plant cultivation or their simple digestive systems. She led her traumatized students into Dr. Yoonji's classroom, desperately hoping for something normal and harmless. Dr. Yoonji was a small, energetic woman who bounced around her classroom with infectious enthusiasm. She had prepared what looked like an innocent presentation about human biological development. Velthar settled her students into their seats, noticing that Thin's leaves were still a worrying shade of yellow from the previous lecture. Welcome, everyone, Dr. Yoonji beamed, clicking to her first slide. Today we're exploring human evolution and how our species developed its unique characteristics. The first image showed early humans running across a vast plain, chasing what appeared to be a large four-legged animal. Velthar expected to learn about gathering fruits or simple farming, but Dr. Yoonji had other plans. Humans are what we call persistence predators, she explained with obvious pride. This is actually quite rare in nature. Most predators rely on speed, strength, or stealth for quick kills, but humans, we just never give up. Crix's gaseous form rippled with confusion. What does that mean exactly? Oh, it's fascinating. Dr. Yoonji continued, showing a video of humans jogging steadily across rough terrain. Our ancestors would pick a target animal and just start chasing it. Not fast, mind you, just at a steady pace, hour after hour after hour. The alien students stared in growing horror as she explained the process. The humans would follow their prey under the blazing sun, tracking footprints, never stopping, never resting. The animals would run in bursts, trying to escape, but the humans would always appear again, still coming, still following. Eventually, Dr. Yoonji said cheerfully, the animal would collapse from pure exhaustion. Then the humans would simply walk up and, well, you know, Thin made a strangled sound. Her people survived by absorbing sunlight and minerals from soil. The idea of deliberately hunting and consuming another living creature was beyond nightmarish. It was like hearing about cannibalism. But surely modern humans don't do this anymore, Velthar asked desperately. Oh, we don't need to hunt for survival now, Dr. Yoonji agreed. But we still have those same instincts, marathon running, ultra-endurance races, obstacle courses that last for days. We just redirected that persistence hunting drive into recreation. She clicked to her next slide, showing humans doing things that made the alien students gasp in terror. People jumping off cliffs with small parachutes, diving into churning ocean waters surrounded by massive sharks, climbing vertical rock faces with no safety equipment. Humans actively seek dangerous situations for fun, Dr. Yunji explained as casually as discussing the weather. We call them extreme sports: bungee jumping, free diving, rock climbing, surfing in storms, racing cars at incredible speeds, jumping out of perfectly good aircraft. But why? Crix managed to ask, his form now flickering like a dying light bulb. His people avoided any situation that might cause harm or discomfort. A human student named Jiwon turned around with a huge grin. For the adrenaline rush, the thrill, life gets boring if you don't push your limits. Boring? Thin whispered, her leaves now turning an alarming shade of purple. You risk death because life is boring? Exactly, Jiwon laughed. My dad goes skydiving every weekend. My sister does cave diving in underwater tunnels. I prefer mountain climbing in winter storms. There's nothing like the feeling when you're right on the edge between life and death. The alien students looked at each other in absolute terror. These humans deliberately sought out potentially fatal situations for entertainment, but Dr. Yunji wasn't finished destroying their sanity. Now let's talk about human medicine, she announced, pulling up images that made several aliens cover their eyes. Humans practice something called surgery, she explained, showing footage of doctors cutting into a human body. When something goes wrong inside us, we deliberately cut ourselves open to fix it. Crix's form destabilized so much he nearly lost cohesion entirely. You cut each other open? With sharp metal tools, Dr. Yunji confirmed proudly. We remove diseased organs, transplant healthy ones from other humans, repair damaged tissues, even perform operations on the brain while the patient is awake. Thin actually fainted, her tree-like form toppling over as her leaves turned completely black. We also practice something called vaccination, Dr. Yunji continued, oblivious to the alien panic around her. We deliberately inject ourselves with weakened versions of deadly diseases. You inject diseases into yourselves? Velthar gasped. It builds immunity, explained another human student named Daehyun. My little brother just got his shots last week. Measles, mumps, polio, influenza, all the good stuff. But the most amazing thing, Dr. Yunji said, clicking to her final slide, is organ transplantation. We can take a heart from one human and put it into another human's body. Kidneys, livers, lungs, even faces and hands. The remaining conscious, alien students sat in stunned silence. These creatures didn't just kill other species for food and wage endless wars against each other. They also voluntarily cut themselves apart, injected diseases into their bodies, and exchanged internal organs like trading cards. Any questions? Dr. Yunji asked brightly. Velthar stood up on shaking legs, supporting the unconscious Thin. We need to review our notes, she stammered. As they carried their fainting colleague from the classroom, they could hear Dr. Yunji calling cheerfully. Don't forget, next week we're covering human reproduction and childbirth. It's absolutely incredible how much pain humans endure voluntarily. Professor Velthar quickened her pace toward the exit, wondering if there was any way to contact their shuttle for an emergency evacuation. They weren't studying a primitive species. They were trapped on a planet full of immortal nightmare creatures, who treated death as a hobby and pain as entertainment. That evening, the alien students sat huddled together in their assigned dormitory room like survivors of a catastrophe. The small space felt like a sanctuary from the horror they'd discovered about their host species. Thin had recovered from fainting, but her leaves remained a sickly gray color. Crix floated near the ceiling, his gaseous form still unstable from shock. Professor Velthar paced back and forth, her crystalline skin dim with worry. We have to leave this planet, she whispered urgently. These creatures are more dangerous than anything in our databases. They're living weapons disguised as students. But how do we get to the shuttle without them noticing? Crix asked, his voice wavering like wind through broken glass. They probably have surveillance everywhere. Military species always do. Thin's leaves rustled with anxiety. Did you see how casually they talked about cutting each other open and injecting diseases? They probably experiment on other species too. They were so absorbed in their fearful, planning that they didn't notice the soft knock on their door. When it opened, they all froze in terror, expecting to see armed guards or scientists with medical tools. Instead, a young human woman peered in with concerned eyes. "Hey, I'm Minji from down the hall," she said softly, stepping into the room with slow, careful movements. "I noticed you guys seemed really upset after classes today. Are you okay?" The aliens pressed closer together, like prey animals facing a predator. Minji was small by human standards, with long dark hair and kind eyes, but after everything they'd learned, she might as well have been a monster wearing a friendly mask. "We're fine," Professor Velthar lied, her voice cracking like breaking ice, but Minji didn't leave. Instead, she sat down on the floor near them, keeping her distance and making herself smaller. "You don't look fine. You look terrified. Was it something in Professor Minho's history class? Or Dr. Yunji's biology lecture?" Thin couldn't hold back anymore. Her leaves turned almost black with despair. "Your species is terrifying," she whispered. "You're all killers. You hunt things to death. You fight endless wars. You cut each other apart for fun. How are we supposed to feel safe here?" Instead of getting angry or defensive, Minji's face filled with understanding and sadness. She was quiet for a long moment, then slowly reached for her tablet. "I get why you'd think that," she said gently. "Those classes only show you part of who we are, the violent part, the dangerous part. But that's not the whole story." She turned her tablet so they could see the screen, then played a video that made the aliens gasp. It showed humans in bright yellow uniforms running into a building that was completely on fire, flames shooting out of every window. But instead of running away from the danger, they were running toward it. "These are firefighters," Minji explained. "They risk their lives to save complete strangers. Watch this." The video showed a firefighter carrying an unconscious child out of the burning building, then immediately turning around to go back in for more people. The human's face was covered in soot and sweat, but his eyes showed only determination to save lives. "But why would they do that?" Crix asked, his form stabilizing slightly with curiosity. "Because that's who we are too," Minji said, switching to another video. This one showed doctors in a war zone, treating wounded people regardless of which side they'd been fighting on. "We're dangerous, yes, we can be violent and destructive, but that same intensity that makes us capable of terrible things also makes us capable of incredible love and protection." She showed them footage from the Sewol ferry disaster, where Coast Guard divers had worked for days in freezing, dangerous waters to search for survivors. Many of the rescuers were the same age as the students they were trying to save. These divers knew they might not make it back up. Minji continued, her voice thick with emotion. The water was cold, the currents were deadly, and the ship was sinking. But they kept going down anyway, over and over, hoping to find just one more person alive. Thin's leaves began to show tiny flecks of green again. But why risk their own lives for strangers? "Because we don't fight because we hate what's in front of us," Minji said, her eyes bright with tears. "We fight because we love what's behind us. Every war, every battle, every dangerous rescue. It's about protecting the people we care about." She showed them more videos. Parents working multiple jobs to pay for their children's education, staying awake all night when their kids were sick. Teachers spending their own money on school supplies for students whose families couldn't afford them. Neighbors helping rebuild each other's homes after natural disasters. "You see, our capacity for violence and our capacity for love come from the same place," Minji explained. "We feel everything intensely. When we love completely. When we're threatened, we fight with everything we have. When someone needs help, we'll risk anything to save them." She showed them a video of an elderly Korean man who had spent his entire life savings to build schools in poor villages, working until he was 90 years old because he believed every child deserved an education. "The same persistence that made us hunters also makes us refuse to give up on the people we love," Minji continued. "The same willingness to face danger that makes us climb mountains also makes us run into burning buildings to save lives." Crix slowly descended from the ceiling, his form becoming more solid and stable. "So the dangerous things you do, We do them because we refuse to let fear control us, Minji said with a gentle smile. Every mountain climbed, every ocean crossed, every boundary pushed. It's about growing stronger so we can protect what matters most. For the first time since arriving on Earth, the alien students began to see humans as something other than monsters. They were still dangerous, still capable of incredible violence, but that power was directed by love, not hatred. As Minji quietly left them to think, Professor Velthar realized they weren't trapped with predators. They were being protected by guardians who had learned to channel their deadly nature into something beautiful. 3 weeks had passed since that evening conversation with Minji, and everything had changed for the alien students. What started as a mission to study a primitive species had become the most important education of their lives. They had watched, learned, and slowly begun to understand the incredible complexity of human nature. The morning the evacuation ship arrived, Professor Velthar was sitting in the university cafeteria watching something that would have terrified her weeks earlier. Do-hyun, their human roommate, was surrounded by textbooks and half-empty coffee cups, patiently explaining calculus to a struggling classmate for the 3rd night in a row. His eyes were red with exhaustion, but he refused to give up until his friend understood the concepts. "You don't have to do this," the other student had said. "It's not your problem if I fail." "Yes, it is," Do-hyun had replied simply. "We're in this together." That same persistence that had once horrified Velthar now filled her with something like admiration. Humans didn't just hunt prey to exhaustion. They also refused to abandon friends in need. Thin was in the campus garden, her leaves now a vibrant, healthy green as she watched human students carefully tending to injured plants and feeding stray cats. The same species that had developed biological weapons was also nurturing sick animals back to health with incredible gentleness. Crix had spent the morning in Professor Minho's office, not for class, but watching the history professor volunteer. His time at a local refugee center. The same man who taught about humanity's endless wars was using his knowledge to help displaced people understand their legal rights and find safe housing. "Professor," one refugee had said in broken Korean, "why do you help us? We're not your people." "You're human," Professor Minho had replied. "That makes you my people." When the communication device in their dormitory crackled to life, all 3 alien students gathered around it with mixed feelings. Commander Zethal's face appeared on the screen, his features stern with worry and urgency. "Professor Velthar," he announced without preamble, "we've received your distress signals about this dangerous predator species. We've come to extract you immediately. The consortium has classified humans as a potential threat level 7, the highest rating we've ever assigned." Velthar looked at her students, seeing their reactions. Weeks ago, they would have been scrambling toward the shuttle bay. Now they stood their ground with quiet determination. "With respect, Commander," Thin said, her voice stronger than it had ever been, "we request permission to complete our studies here." "Complete your studies?" Commander Zethal's image flickered with disbelief. "Have you lost your minds? These creatures are living weapons. Our intelligence reports show they've mastered every form of destruction known to science." "Yes, sir, that's true," Crix replied, his gaseous form now stable and shimmering with confidence. "But you're missing the most important part of the data." Over the past weeks, they had seen the complete picture of humanity. Yes, Jiwon still went mountain climbing in dangerous weather and talked casually about extreme sports. But they had also watched him spend his entire weekend gently nursing an injured bird back to health, building it a small shelter and researching the best foods for its recovery. "Commander," Professor Velthar began carefully, "humans are indeed the most dangerous species we've ever encountered. Their capacity for violence and destruction exceeds anything in our databases, but they're also the most protective species we've ever studied." She thought about the firefighters Minji had shown them, the doctors treating patients in war zones, the teachers spending their own money on supplies for their students. Every act of human kindness was backed by that same intensity that made them such effective warriors. They've taken their capacity for destruction and channeled it into creation, healing, and guardianship, Velthar continued. They don't fight because they enjoy violence. They fight because they love deeply and will do anything to protect what they care about. Commander Zethal's expression grew more confused. Are you saying these predators are safe? No, Crix interjected. They're not safe at all. They're incredibly dangerous, but they're dangerous in the same way a parent becomes dangerous when protecting their children. Their violence has purpose, direction, and most importantly, restraint. Thin stepped forward, her leaves rustling with conviction. Commander, we've watched humans who could kill with their bare hands spend hours teaching struggling students. We've seen warriors become healers, hunters become protectors. They haven't evolved beyond their predatory nature. They've learned to master it. The commander was quiet for a long moment, processing this unexpected report. So what exactly are you recommending? Professor Velthar straightened her crystalline form, making her decision. We're recommending that the consortium not just accept humans into galactic society, we're recommending active recruitment. Recruitment? For what? As guardians, Velthar replied firmly. The galaxy has many threats, Commander. Pirates, hostile species, cosmic disasters, diseases that could wipe out entire worlds. We've always struggled to find species willing and able to face these dangers. She gestured toward the window, where human students were visible going about their daily lives, studying, laughing, helping each other, completely unaware they were being discussed by alien commanders. But here's a species that runs toward danger instead of away from it. They see a burning building and their first instinct is to rush in and save lives. They see suffering and they fight to end it. They see injustice and they refuse to accept, Crix added. They're apex predators who have chosen to be protectors instead of conquerors. Warriors who fight for peace instead of conquest. They're exactly what the galaxy needs. Commander Zethal was silent for several minutes, clearly struggling with this radically different assessment. Finally, he spoke. And you're all willing to stake your reputations on this evaluation? Yes, sir. All 4 aliens replied in unison. Very well. Continue your studies, but I want detailed reports on everything. Their motivations, their decision-making processes, their capacity for both cooperation and conflict. If we're going to recommend them as galactic guardians, we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. As the communication ended, the alien students looked at each other with something that might have been pride. They had arrived expecting to study a primitive species. Instead, they had discovered something far more valuable, a species that had learned to transform their deadliest traits into their greatest strengths. Outside their window, the human students continued their daily routines, unaware they had just been recommended as the galaxy's newest protectors by the very aliens, who had once feared them most.